G'day there, you're watching the Aussie BIM Guru, and today you've reached the third part of my Revit Feasibility series, and today we're looking at design options in the context of building massing. So the best way to manage it during this process, because I find this is a common issue when people are working on feasibilities and site studies. We've got a few parts coming after this, so from there we're going to look at how to schedule areas out of our feasibility masses, and also look at some basic shadow diagrams and the best workflows to achieve those. And then we'll go on to some things in Dynamo as well, such as site analysis and Power BI to visualize our findings. Anyway, so in our last two sessions, we have used design options a little bit already to establish some site controls for full and half site. However, today we're going to look at it in order to establish actual building massing options for design study. So design options, for those that aren't aware, are able to contain model elements, grids, loadable families, and model groups. So basically 3D elements typically. But they can't contain some notable things such as dimensions, tags, and annotations, as well as 2D lines and detail groups. And one really big thing they can't contain is levels, which makes it quite hard to use levels and design options mixed together. As you saw in my last tutorial, you have to use filters in order to hide levels that you're not considering at a particular point in time, or work sets if you're in a work shared model. So I find the golden rule with design options in any scenario is to use as few as possible and keep them only as long as you need them in your model. So try to always accept the primary option as soon as you know that it is the option you're proceeding with. I find in feasibility studies, people are very tempted to keep every single option they've considered in the model just in case someone panics and go back to option 4, go back to option 2, etc. I find it's better to back up models rather than keep all those options in the one place. And try to use design sets to keep your sub options rather than making new sets for every single option in your project. I'll show you what I mean by that really shortly. But the workflow today we're going to look at is to set up a few extra sub options in our option sets that we already have. So for those that haven't seen it, we basically have an option set for our full site massing and another option set for our half site massing. So two feasibility studies essentially. And we're going to set up the building mass within those options as well. So we're going to work within our planning controls that we set up in part 1. We're going to look at an alternative level mix. So we're going to look at a full commercial mix versus a residential/commercial mix. So there'll be different level heights. We're also then going to look at just how to achieve the mass floors and also just graphically represent them like on the right, where you can actually colorize different mass floors with different colors to represent different areas. Okay, so without further ado, we're actually just going to jump straight into Revit, and we'll start with our model from the last part. So in our first part, we set up these generic models that represent the boundary of the site, and then from there we actually went and set up our maximization of our site to find out the maximum GFA that we could estimate in Excel or a similar environment for how to estimate the amount we could fit. I might just quickly resize this window so my banner's not blocked. Cool. Okay, but what we're going to do now is look at some sub options. So to get to design options, you just go to Manage tab and Design Options. And we've already set up an option set for our planning control mass. And then we've got a full site and a half site option set. So essentially to make a new option set, you just do so here. And then you can have sub options within those sets. So what we're going to do is have 2 extra options here. So we're going to have 1B, which is Resi Commercial, and 1C, which is going to be full commercial. Likewise, we'll have another set of options in here for our half site. And this is so we can test the feasibility of using either half and half site program or full site program as commercial or residential. Okay, so from there, what we need to do now is actually set up some views to work with. So we're going to duplicate this view for our maximization study, and we're just going to rename that to 1B. And you may recall that we already set up some filters in order to hide particular levels. So the way that we set these up is under filters. You can see we've got one here that says hide all levels that do not meet the criteria of either being a typical level or 1A. So we're just going to duplicate that and just make a couple of copies of this filter that we can use. So we're going to call one of them is not 1B, and also the same for 1C. I won't do option 2 in this case because I'm going to jump ahead a few steps shortly, and then that will be set up already. So what we're going to do is in this view, we're going to go to Visibility Graphics, Filters, and we're just going to add that not 1B filter. And we're going to tick that off, and then we're going to remove the 1A filter. At the moment there's some levels that are hidden already, but what I've already done is I've set up an additional level type called 1B. So what I'm going to do is just take these control levels and I'm going to duplicate them to 1B, and I'm just going to paste them to the same place, and I'm going to change their type to 1B, and then the filter will let them show up. So essentially we want to call these something similar, so control basement. Since my last part I've actually added a basement level, so our mass goes down below that now, and I've just added a couple of basement floors to our typical level mix from the last part. Okay, so we'll just call that control 1 and control 2. Highly recommend that you follow along from the previous parts so that you have something to follow along with as I go, because some of these tasks are a little bit repetitious, so you may find it beneficial to have a reference model that you can work on whilst I'm talking along. And of course you can jump through if you want to as well. So we're going to make a 1C as well. We'll just remove that 1B filter, add the 1C filter, turn it off. So you can see that there's a lot of repetition and just setup because of the fact that you can't put levels in design options. Because of the way levels behave, it sort of does make sense that they can't go in design options. But nonetheless, it is quite a pain still. So now we're going to have to create a new level type. So I'm just going to call that 1C so that my filter detects the name. And likewise, we'll just call this 1C control basement. Keep in mind the level type is what's being filtered here. Okay, so we'll take that and we'll take this one here, call that control 1. You could turn off your site context as well. At this point, if you find it's getting in the way, I find it's useful to keep it on just so you can see it. Okay, so that's pretty much that done. And one thing that's important to do as well is to tell these stories that they're not building stories. So what I usually do is just go through, select them, and that's an easy way to sort of not have to worry about them when you're dealing with level-based or building story-based elements. So we'll tick that off. And you may recall as well, we already have a set of levels for our typical level mix already established. What we're going to do now is we're just going to take this mass from 1A and we're just going to copy it across to design option 1B so that we can play with it. So I'm just going to go to 1B, which should hide my site. You may recall that we already have a planning control available. So we can always go design options and we can set up planning controls to automatic. And then we can look at the full site planning control whenever we want to sort of test if our building masses are within our planning control boundary. What we're going to do is we're just going to activate option 1B. And I'm just going to paste to the same place. And for now, I'm just going to deactivate mass floors so that they're not in the way visually. Okay, so this is essentially our building mass that we're going to play with now. So we might push things in or we might adjust areas in order to reach a more desirable GFA target to achieve the FSR that we're seeking on our site. So let's say that one thing we decide to do is we're going to create a laneway in here. So what you can do is you can either push it manually or you can use offsets. There's a lot of ways to move boundaries in massing. In this case, I'm just going to manually move it by, let's say we're going to push it in by 10 meters. And then I might actually push that by just a little bit less because that's quite a slender edge that we're ending up with there. So we'll just do it by 8 meters. Okay, so that should reduce some of our GFA and our FSR to get closer to a target in this case. I'm not actually working to a precise GFA and FSR because it's quite a refined process, but I'm just referring to, I guess, common standards you'd be using as you go. What I'm going to do now is just push in my residential zone as well a little bit. Maybe we'll go in 3 meters and we'll go 3 meters from the front as well, just so that we get a little bit more sunlight or direct solar access around this building here. So I'm just going to push that back as well. Okay, and let's just say that our basement is maybe half the volume of the site area. So we're just going to realign this. And we do need to realign all our profiles because when you copy a mass, it no longer keeps the same constraints. So you do have to re-establish those, unfortunately. But it's quite easy, just align to the levels as you go. And now these are reconstrained. Okay, so what we'll do is we're just going to draw some model lines. We're going to set our work plan to grounds and we'll just draw in our full site massing floor plan from before. And we'll just draw some model lines. So let's just say we want approximately half of our site for our car park. So again, you don't have to be super precise. If you know exactly a dimension you need, obviously be precise in that case. So you know, maybe we perpendicular snap here, and then we close that off there using our tab tool. So if you click tab, you can cycle through selections, which is quite handy. So we'll just go back to our 3D. You see in this case, it actually drew it higher. So what you can do is just change the host to ground floor and just create form. And we can push that solid form down to the bottom of our basement. Again, we can use the align tool in order to keep our profiles all lined up. But essentially this is our basic building mass. Okay, and obviously as well, whilst you have this on, you can always test the full site controls against your building just to make sure that you're staying within the bounds of your mass. So let's say we actually want to push this back a little bit so we can afford some balcony space. All you have to do is reactivate your design option, edit mass, and then we can just push this back by a little bit. Let's say we want to go to 51 meters to push that back by about 3 meters. Okay, and then from there, all you need to do is just reactivate mass floors. And in this case, we're just going to go from ground floor, and we're going to include our basements on the bottom as well. And there you go, that's as simple as it is to, I guess, set up a building mass option. So really, the plan and control mass can be just copied and manipulated to become a building mass. Obviously, you can get more detailed as well with massing. You can actually take edges and push them down to create chamfered forms. In this case, I won't, but that's possible as well. And your building mass floors will obviously respond to that change as well. So that's the great thing about mass floors, they follow your geometry. But we're just going to stick with a more regular mass for now. Okay. And let's say we wanted to work with a different level mix for our other ones. So currently we have 3.1 meter floor to floor for our residential zone and 4 meter floor to floor for commercial. But another option we want to pursue is a full commercial fit out. So this is a 4 meter floor to floor all the way up to the bar level. So what we need to do is actually establish a second set of levels. But one problem we have is that currently we do have a set of levels for what we call mix 1, which is our standard mix. So what we'll do is we'll just change the name of their level type, and we'll just call that typical level mix 1. And then on top of that, we're also going to create another type called mix 2. But for now, we'll just keep this one as mix 1. And we need to create a filter that will essentially hide everything except for the mix 1 levels. So we're just going to create another filter. We'll just duplicate this and we'll just call it not mix 1. So essentially we need a whole extra copy of levels in order to establish a different floor-to-floor distribution, which is quite a hassle. So we'll say anything that does not equal mix 1, and then obviously we can duplicate that to make a mix 2 filter as well. So level management is very important when you're doing feasibility. There are other ways to do feasibilities without levels using Dynamo, but we'll look at that in a separate video series, I think, 'cause it's quite a different workflow. One that I prefer, I'll be honest. So in this case, we're just going to say not mix 1, and we'll just tick this off. And all we should see is our levels from mix 1. And what we're going to want to do is just identify these as belonging to mix 1 in their name. So what I've actually done is set up a little Dynamo script in the background. There's probably been a few videos since you've seen Dynamo, so hopefully you're happy to see it again. But essentially all this filter is doing is saying find all levels, get their name, make sure that their type is mix 1 or contains the words mix 1. And then we're going to take their name and we're going to add M1 to the front of it and then set that level's name with that. So essentially I'll just run this script, and essentially all my levels for mix 1 should now gain M1 on the front, which is really easy. So, and what we're going to do then is just take all those levels, copy, paste the same place, and whilst we're still selecting them, we'll make them mix 2. That way we only see mix 1 levels. But we're going to duplicate this view, and we're going to swap out mix 1 with mix 2. There's one of my cats. He also likes feasibility studies as well. Okay, so I've built another Dynamo script, which is able to go and rename the mix 2 levels to suit mix 1, because when you move these levels, they sort of take on a name that's not very suitable. In this case, it's assumed they're all going to be basement levels. The great thing about levels is if you filter them, they stay in the same order as their elevation or their creation, I believe. So in this case, I'm just going to take those same levels. I'm going to find all my mix 1 levels, but I'm also going to find all my mix 2 levels using a filter by Boolean mask. And I'm going to replace M1 with M2 in the name of the mix 1 levels, and then rename the mix 2 levels with that changed name. So if I run this, they should all rename to mix 2. And there you go. So you see that that's how you can achieve a really quick renaming of your levels using Dynamo. But I won't go too into detail on that because this is a Revit focused video. Anyway, all we have to do from there is we have to review, actually first we should review the levels in order to redistribute them into a 4 meter spacing. So I'm going to go all the way back down to my residential level, and I'm just going to delete all the levels until that point, because at this point our program changes. So what I really want is I want this to just be called level 10, and we're going to array this level, and we'll just array it maybe 20 times up by 4 meters. Okay, so let's see how many levels we got to there. Okay, and actually we almost end up at the same distribution. So we're gonna just drop our bar by 600 mil so that our last floor is 400, is 4 meters, and then that gives us a little bit more room in our bar. But essentially we have 2 sets of levels to work with now, and because we're using filters, they're not all in the way visually. So we're just gonna go to option 1C, and I'm just gonna take this mass. I'll just copy this before I activate 1C. So in my visibility graphic settings under design options, I can override that to show me 1C. And I'm just going to paste to same place whilst I'm in option 1C. And essentially we're going to work with the exact same building form. However, we're going to work with the mass floors for mix 2 instead. And if you put mix, or the mix acronym on the front of the level, you'll see that it's much easier to isolate it because these are all sorted by name. So essentially I just need to pick my ground floor and all my mix 2 levels instead. And that's how you achieve a different floor distribution. Likewise, I could also muck around with the basement as well, do similar things to what I did before. I believe I actually took the wrong mass in this case, so I'm just going to quickly update that. I think I must have taken my 1A mass instead by accident. But because we're managing our design options really well, it's really easy to work this way. You'll see that we've really quickly just got the same amount of information. There's no Control A selection in this dialog, which is a little bit frustrating. But maybe in future versions they might add it. Hint, hint, Autodesk. And then we'll just add ground floor. Cool. And there you go. That's how easy it is to set up a floor distribution. Cool. So from there, really all that's left to do in this part is to find a way to sort of graphically represent our floors with different colors. So there's a lot of ways to do this. For now, I'm just going to do a bit of a lazy method in that I'm just going to take the floor and I'm just going to set a filter to detect the floor's area. So I'm just going to say that any floor over 2,000 meters, I'll set up a filter for, and any below 2,000, I'll also set up a filter for. This is a good little temporary way just to do levels. Say you're in a rush and you just need to really quickly graphically override these. Obviously you could do a select and override elements, but I don't usually recommend that. So we can do over 2,000, and we're going to apply this filter to mass floors. So we'll just expand mass floors, and we'll just say floor area is greater than 2,000. Likewise, we'll make one for less than 2,000. So we'll just call that less 2001, just in case any of our floors are exactly on 2,000, very unlikely. And there you go. So now we have 2 filters we can use to graphically control these elements. So we'll just add those filters. And for anything over 2,000, we'll say it's commercial. So we want to just make that a blue. And likewise, anything that is residential is green. So in that case, we'll just make it a green color. Okay. And that really quickly colorizes our floors. You obviously see our car parks colorize themselves differently as well. But another way to control the graphics of these masses is actually to override the masses category as well. So if you go to manage object styles and you go down to mass and just expand that category, we can actually add some categories to massing. So let's just say we want to call one commercial, one residential, and one car park. And what we can do is just set some override materials to these subcategories. So we'll just duplicate the default material in this case. We might even duplicate our feasibility control material that we set up for our generic model in part 1, just so we can set an override material for our massing. And we'll just make it slightly transparent, and we'll match the color of the floors. The material browser takes a while to open sometimes, so we'll just search for feasibility, and we'll duplicate our existing, and we'll call this one commercial, and we'll just duplicate its asset, and likewise we'll call it the same thing, and we'll just make this a blue material, and we'll make this transparent as well by 50%. And then for the graphics, we can just use render appearance, or we can actually just manually set it as well. So we might just do it manually. In this case, we'll say 50% and blue. Okay. From there, we can also set a surface pattern color as well, so that when we're in hidden line mode, we still get an override color. Okay. And we just got to go and make sure that applies. Looks like in this case it didn't apply. I think you have to hit OK to apply material in this case, which is a bit of a pain, but is what it is. But yeah, we're almost done with this part, so bear with me. We'll have the nice graphic in a second. I'll try to finish each of these with a nice graphic that sort of rounds out the session, just so that you have something you can present to your peers or put in a report, so that you have use out of each session. But essentially we're really just going to create 3 materials here. So if you want to skip ahead about a minute, you know, I won't be offended. Otherwise, see this as I guess a way to create materials. So in this case, we'll just create generic 225, transparency 50%. And again, we'll just make this a gray in this case. Cool. Okay, that, and then our last one is our residential. So in this case, I'll just put that there. The reason why I copy this here is because when you go to the material browser, it'll immediately take you to that area of the material browser rather than having to scroll down to find it. Even if it's not quite the right material, it gives me an easy place to duplicate. Cool, so we're going to do a residential material, and then we'll duplicate this, and again, you guessed it, we're just replacing a color. In this case, we'll just make this a green and a green. So obviously you could set up these in your template as well, rather than having to do this over and over and over again. I highly recommend templating. Okay, so from here, what we can just do is jump in our mass, and we can select this particular section of our mass. And if we set its subcategory to residential, it should acquire the material properties that we apply to it. So if we go hidden line, in this case it looks like it's transparent, so we may need to go back to our override. Actually no, where's this? This must be getting transparency automatically. Interesting. I think this has a material override already. Possibly. Very interesting. Yeah, it looks like it's already being overridden in material by something else. But what I'll do is I'll just really quickly set these to the right categories. You can see our commercial worked there, and I see my car park will work too. So there must be a setting I forgot to set for the residential material. I guess is the surface pattern. But you can see that you sort of get a more effective graphic out of that. And then you could turn off your mass floor filters if you wanted to, and just use your mass instead. You don't have to apply transparency as well. You can just make it a block material. It's interesting because I've got the color set up for my residential feasibility material there. So I mustn't have set the right material in my overrides. So I might just jump into my object styles. And again, if you've lasted out this long, well done. Looks like in this case it is the right material. I've just set that to mechanical equipment. I noticed I'm one line too low. That would be why. So I guess I just made all my ducts look like a residential material, which doesn't really make a lot of sense. Usually I don't recommend trying to interrupt the material browser opening, because it does have a habit of crashing, as a lot of things in Revit do, as you may know. Okay. There you go. And you can see that's quite an effective graphic. But obviously you could go into your materials as well, and we could set these to be 100% opaque, which I'll do now just to show you how that looks as well, because that way you really just see your mass flaws on the edge of your mass, which some people do prefer. Okay, so we'll just say this is 0% transparent, and we'll take our feasibility for commercial, 0%, car park 0%. So some people prefer that as a graphic style instead. Obviously a mass floor is still there, it just can't be seen below here. But there we go. And obviously we can also take our mass floors from these as well, just by going to our mass schedule and setting our design option to Resi Commercial, for example, and we can still test our FSR and our overall GFA. So that's pretty much all for this tutorial. But then in the next one, we're actually going to build area schedules. And I'll show you some good techniques for how to actually schedule departments so that you can do a programmatic breakdown of your building, and how to apply tolerance to your GBA so it can be measured as GFA instead. But that's all for today. So thanks for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed it. And feel free to leave any comments or suggestions on the workflow down below. And hopefully I'll see you in the next video. Thanks. Take care. Bye.